Okay, now we're going to do Quotes of GK Chesterton. It's from this book, Holy Grail Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers. Okay, he was an English writer, but he converted from the Anglican Church to the Catholic Church, and he's sort of a continuation of the idea of English people when they start to study Christian history. It's very common that they convert to becoming Catholic, sort of like John Henry Newman was the genius of the earlier 1800s. Chesterton came along and was sort of like the genius, one of the geniuses of the early 1900s. Okay, he's a very good Catholic writer. He wrote a bunch of books like Orthodoxy and mystery series. The Man Who Was Called Thursday, stuff like that, and Friday. All right. He was also nicknamed the Prince of Paradox. He had a lot of expressions, sort of like with the chiasmus antithesis, that turn back upon themselves. And here's a quote by Ward Farnsworth from his Classical English Rhetoric. He said, "The neat parallel way in which Chesterton makes his points gives them a ring of incontestability. The perfect rhetorical matching of two claims lends authority to them." Okay, so here's G.K. Chesterton quote. By the way, he lived from 1874 to 1936. "Fairy tales do not tell children that dragons exist. Children already know that dragons exist. Fairy tales tell children that the dragon can be killed. What the fairy tale provides for him is a St. George to kill the dragon." Okay? A dead thing can go with the stream, but only a living thing can go against it. That's right. So anybody can be a conformist lightweight. It takes, intelligence to challenge conventional, to be a contrarian. G.K. Chesterton was a guest on a radio show, and they asked him what book would he want if he was stranded on a desert island. He said, "Thomas's Guide to Shipbuilding." Okay, Chesterton continues. "The disadvantage of men not knowing the past is they do not know the present. History is a hill or a high vantage point from which men can understand the age in which they live." That's very true. It's been my experience. Like, you talk to a lot of Americans, and they're so hopelessly ignorant, you can't even really have a conversation with them. It's like they're like mental retards. They don't know any history. If you want to be in the ballpark, be able to have an intelligent conversation about history, you have to know something about the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks are the epitome of freedom, creativity, okay? You also have to know a little bit about the ancient Romans. The Romans were brutality, collectivism, sort of a lot of evil came out of the ancient Romans. There were a few good things like Cicero, but the ancient Romans were all about power and control. And the reason why they're so great to study, if you're interested in politics and freedom and liberty and all that, is because nobody has a dog in that fight. If you start talking about American events, people become very offended and start playing games and pulling you into modernism BS. But you can still have a pretty free conversation about the ancient Romans, and you see how power politics works. You learn all about civil war, about the different ways to balance power, and you could really have an intelligent conversation without getting into, well, my group does this or your group does that. So, and you also need to know something about the Renaissance, okay? And you should know, Victorian England versus Ireland. That would be pretty useful minimum. Okay, and then when you start studying more, you learn the events of the last century, even though you can't really talk freely about them as much because people are always offended. But I think it's highly valuable to see the patterns across, like what happened to Poland at the hands of Russia or Germany, what happened to Ireland at the hands of England. That's pretty valuable knowledge, and even what the USA did to places. Okay, let's keep going. This is G.K. Chesterton continues. "It is absurd for the evolutionist to complain that it is unthinkable for God to make everything out of nothing, and then to pretend that it's more reasonable to think that nothing should turn itself into everything." That's what I'm trying to say. The reason why people think evolution is true is because they've been force-fed that in the public school system. Look, I majored in evolutionary biology at Stanford University. I was an A+ student in the subject. And I can tell you, evolution is quite ridiculous over a lot of issues. Don't get me wrong. It is useful for microevolution. It is useful for variation within a species. But to think that it can explain origin of life is ridiculous. It has nothing to do with that. And it has no explanation at all for the fine-tuning arguments. Okay. All right, so G.K. Chesterton continues. "Evolution as an explanation, as the ultimate philosophy for the cause of living things, is still faced with the problem of producing rabbits out of an empty hat." Yeah, you can't just say everything was made out of nothing. That's Ridiculous, okay? And it's not biologic chemistry, the origin of life and the origin of complexity. It's geologic chemistry, the origin of life, okay? And mutations like scratching a audio CD with a paper clip, okay? You're not going to improve on Beethoven and Mozart and Bach or any other great composer or song by scratching it with a paper clip, okay? All right, G.K. Chesterton continues. To many men, the theory of evolution was heartbreaking. It seemed that an ape had suddenly risen to gigantic stature and destroyed the seven heavens. But the position of those who regarded the opening of the descent of man by Darwin as the opening of one of the seven seals of the last days is a great deal sounder than people have generally allowed. They fundamentally rebelled against Darwinism, not because they had a fear that it would affect Scripture, but because they had a fear, not altogether unreasonable or ill-founded, that it would affect morality. Yeah, the reason why the English people loved the Darwinism of Charles Darwin is because in the Victorian age, England ruled the world. And they would say basically through Herbert Spencer's transformation of Darwinism into survival of the fittest, it was an excuse for them to just abuse all their colonies. They could say, we, the British, are smarter than everybody else, therefore we're the fittest, therefore we can do whatever we want with all these dummies that live in other places like Ireland. And, my father, my ancestors, are half of them are from Ireland, okay? And the British have had them in essentially slavery for many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, about 1,000 years. And, even today, the people of Ireland are being you-know-what-sided, and no one cares. No one talks about it. It's like in America, people think the only group of people that were ever enslaved was the blacks. Okay, but that's ridiculous. Their slavery has been going on. Go read the Bible one of these days. Okay, slavery has been going on for thousands of years in all of the different cultures. Okay, it's just unfortunate that it's still continuing in a lot of continents. Okay, it's continuing for the abuse of the Irish. It's continuing for the abuse of a lot of other populations, and it's wrong, okay? And it's wrong to have people as slaves, and that should be obvious, but they're not getting any sympathy. The destruction of countries like Ireland right now, that's ongoing right now and deliberate and aggressive. And it's also happening to the English people. They're getting a dose of it themselves. I'd like everybody to be free. Okay, let's continue with G.K. Chesterton. He says, there is a road from the eye to the heart which does not go through the intellect. Okay, and that's a little bit like, Pascal, the heart has reasons that the mind knows not. It's a little bit like, The Little Prince by Oprah, something along those lines. The heart makes some decisions. Okay, G.K. Chesterton. The novel is the most popular form of literature because it is the most true. Yeah, it gives time to develop the characters. G.K. Chesterton. Without education, we are in deadly danger of taking educated people seriously. Okay, now here's a great one. It isn't that they can't see the solution, it's that they can't see the problem. And that's been my experience too. It gets sad sometimes. People can't understand that the little they know is just a ridiculous amount that blocks them from understanding, like nutrition, like healthcare, like history, like politics, like freedom versus collectivism. They simply don't have enough knowledge even to grasp the question about the issue. So that's why they have to study on their own some just to get to the point where they can even understand something. Okay, you end up with a Dunning-Kruger type problem where they don't even know enough to know that they don't know. Okay, G.K. Chesterton, you'll never find the solution if you don't see the problem. And again, that's a little bit like the take on Aristotle's quote. If you want to solve a problem, you have to know what the problem is. Like if you want to untie a knot, you have to find the knot first. So anyways, we're going to do Chesterton in several phases because I got so many Chesterton quotes. So that's it for part 1 of G.K. Chesterton. Okay, hope that was useful to you.